أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربي أدخلني مدخل صدق وأخرجني مخرج صدق واجعل لي من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. Dear students, today it is my first lecture of the course titled Environmental Monitoring. Today we will study the topic. The title of the topic is Design of Water Quality Monitoring Programs. The discussion agenda of our current topic is related to first introduction of the water quality monitoring programs. Second, we will uh, discuss the different perspectives about how to set objectives of a monitoring program. For setting objectives of the monitoring programs, we will define the issues first. How well, how it is important to be considered why we are developing a monitoring program. So, secondly, we will develop and we will discuss the conceptual process model, different components of that process model, and third, we will identify water quality information required for setting the objectives of the water quality monitoring program. Similarly, at the end, we will discuss about the articulating specific program objectives. So water quality monitoring programs, why it is important? They are important to undertake because it provides the information to answer the questions which are related to the management of water bodies and their catchments. Okay, so they may be a single exercise to examine a particular issue, or they may be ongoing monitoring programs to ensure that acceptable water quality is maintained. So for the both type of investigations, either it is a single investigation or ongoing monitoring programs, both requires careful plannings because money is very much important, and for investing on the monitoring programs, it is very much important to carefully plan them before implementing them. So good monitoring programs, they have the property that they provides a certain information, and they provides the data, okay, which is cost effective, and it is full of knowledge, and the information is a complete package that can provide complete knowledge about the monitoring program and its outcomes. So when planning a monitoring program, it is essential before field work is commenced to have clear objectives and documented methods, okay, that will be used to analyze data. So when we are planning a program, it is very much important, okay, the before the field work is commenced, we should have a clear objectives and documented methods which we can use to analyze the data. So monitoring programs require the systematic collection of physical, chemical, and biological information. It's not only about getting the data; it is also about the interpretation of the those measurements. Okay, so discussions have to be made as to the information that is required. Okay, before starting the monitoring program, we need to discuss the what is important information for us, what kind of specific data requirements do we have for that monitoring program, where, when, and how data are to be collected. Similarly, the issues related to occupational health safety, that are also important aspect before monitoring program, start of that monitoring program. Similarly, how data are to be analyzed and interpreted, how the quality of data is to be assessed, what procedures are needed to ensure that data are of a defined standard. Similarly, how data are to be managed, like checked and stored, and different how we can access it later on, how information is to be presented and communicated to those who need it. Okay, so our for our target audience, that is the end component of our monitoring program, that how that information is need to be presented and communicated to the stakeholders, major stakeholders. Similarly, when we are going to discuss about setting the objectives of the monitoring program, we need to consider many questions before designing the monitoring programs. These can be like thought as how questions, how to collect, what to collect, when to collect, and where to collect. So, and how to store that analyze samples. Okay, these are unanswerable without a clear specification of the information required. Without knowing the answer of the why question, it is hardly matter how we answer the how questions. Okay, I think you got the point that how we will design our monitoring program. So before setting the objectives of the monitoring program, how we will define the issue. A preferable approach initially consists of identifying and articulating the issue, okay, because it is the most important component. We need to know the process interaction between designer of the monitoring program and the user of the information. So issues normally fall into four categories. First, establishment of environmental value and long-term management protection and restoration of aquatic ecosystems. Second, identification of contaminant sources and cycling in aquatic ecosystems and assessment of magnitude of the problem and measures that need to be taken to protect ecosystem values. So third, evaluation of the performance of management strategies, and the last one is compliance with the legislative and administrative standards. So these four categories we normally discuss as the normal issues. Okay, first is the establishment of the environmental value. Okay, second, identification of the contaminant and its sources. Third, evaluation, and fourth is compliance. So how an issue is identified will be function of values, previous knowledge, and experience. So this is these four categories along with the functions of these functions like values, previous knowledge, and experience. These all components will help us to define the major issue. Second, to develop a conceptual process model, like how our aquatic ecosystem under consideration needs to be defined in general terms, like the key processes that define how the system works must be identified. Okay, they must be identified because these key processes which define how the system works are important to describe later on when you have a clear concept about defining the key processes. Then you can further keep it like can explain it to the target audience very easily. So the system may be a river, lake, estuary, or a coastal zone, and it will have a uniquely key processes. So conceptual process models may be no more than simple box diagrams. They should, however, be made explicit to illustrate the component and linkages in the system to be like setting program objectives. So first how in if we define or design a framework of the conceptual process model, our first component will be setting program objectives. Okay, in the framework first will be setting program objectives. And how we will set the program objectives, like has the issue been defined? First we need to answer these questions. Did we define the issue? What is actually the issue? So has the identity of all the information users been ascertained so that all information required is obtained? So these two questions, has a shared conceptual process model of the system been developed and made explicit? Similarly, has an analysis been undertaken to identify the essential water quality information required? And the last one, to identify the setting of the objective, is have the specific objectives been stated clearly or not? Similarly, study design, data analysis techniques, and specific data requirements. This also needs to be to answer the certain questions which you need to put them in the clear conceptual framework. Okay, like that framework and that proposal or the monitoring program should answer this component of the study design, data analysis technique, and specific data requirements. They should answer these all questions like, have the study location and spatial boundaries been defined? Has the scale of measurements been considered? And the duration of the study been defined? Similarly, has the study type been made explicit and agreed on? Have the parameters to be measured been chosen? And have appropriate data presentation format and summary statistics been selected? Have appropriate technique been selected to allow interferences, testing of hypotheses or changes over time to be assessed? And the last one, have specific data requirements been clearly stated? So the next one, in our conceptual process model, we need to know that how the sampling issues can will be resolved. Like, has a reconnaissance or literature study been taken to characterize spatial and temporal variability of the variables? Is spatial and temporal replication adequate to obtain information required? Are sampling sites safe and accessible under adverse weather conditions? Have the smallest differences or changes to be detected been specified? Have appropriate sampling equipment, storage containers, and preservation procedures been identified? So, all the questions related to the sampling uh, should be answered and clearly represent the total process involved in the sampling. Okay, so they should answer all these questions. Similarly, in the laboratory analysis, you should have the storage life and the techniques and the analysis of the clearly stated analysis. Okay, their statements should be clear. So similarly, does the laboratory have the equipment, access, expertise, and experience to undertake the plant analysis? Is the quality assurance or control plan in place to identify, measure, and control errors? Have all the reasonable steps been taken to protect health and safety of employees? So, similarly, in perspective of the data management analysis, you need to answer the certain question before planning the monitoring program. Uh, the question should be, has a data management system been established? Are the data techniques selected to allow interferences and hypotheses? Are the changes over time available, or like the competent staff available to use them? And the last one is related to the reporting. Has the identity of the all information users been ascertained and the level of understanding of each user been established? Has the time frame in which each information user requires information been established? Has the appropriate form of information presentation that will best convey information been decided? Have the available forms of information transmission been ascertained, and what form of transmission is most appropriate for each information user? So these components present the factors that are perceived to be derived the changes in the system and consequences of those changes. So models can be based on mass transport or flux, equilibrium considerations, or kinetics. So these are the major questions we need to address before monitoring program, start of monitoring program. Because if we can answer, our monitoring program can answer all these questions, then it is worth implementable. So let's go ahead, like need for a conceptual model, why it is important, like how we identify the different locations of the places of the pollutants, from the upstream to the downstream, from city to the ocean. So in the upstream we have the mine areas, so alongside the mine areas we have the mine discharges. Okay, similarly upland erosion, so that also is part of the pollutants for the water quality. Similarly, plant discharges from the city, we because we have the paved and cemented areas, so we gets the runoff, and it directly goes, that runoff directly goes to the water bodies. Similarly, marine and the boat channel bus and the other types of like urban areas, sewage treatment plant. That treatment plant also have outfall, so that does also a source of pollution for the aquatic water body. So open dredge spoil disposal areas are also alongside the harbor areas. Ship waste spills, these are different locations in place for the pollutants. Okay, so why it is important to be used to help define like conceptual model, why we need a conceptual process model to make a good monitoring program for the water quality of the certain area. So what the important components of system are and what the important linkages are likely to be. So it should address these. How we define the conceptual process model? By using these, by addressing these questions. Okay, first question is related to the important components of the system and how they are linked together. Second is important questions to be assessed, like we discussed in the previous section. The key processes and cause effect relationships, the spatial boundaries, temporal and seasonal considerations, scale at which measurements are to be made, site selection, and what the valid measurement parameters are for the process of concern. So the next thing is identifying water quality information. How we identify it is very much important and necessary to become aware of the other studies that have been undertaken historically on the system of the concern or on any other similar system. Existing data need to be collected, checked, and put into a common form. These data will include water quality measurements like stream flow, tidal or current records, or any biological data or water quality other data that might be available. So some of these studies may have been published, others may be in the departmental records of various agencies or in local university departments. Similarly, once existing data are reviewed, uh, gaps and other information needs will become more apparent. And at the last, we will articulate the specific program objectives. How we will articulate? We need to set the specific monitoring program objectives. Commonly, will go beyond scientific issue of the address management issues. So this means that the resource manager need to be involved in this negotiation. The resource manager often will have only a limited range of intervention options available at and will seek to specific objectives that improve the capacity to make an appropriate choice between them. So the resource manager needs to be clear about how the information to be collected will be used in the decision making process. So the clear objectives that make it possible to design a sampling program to obtain the information required. So developing useful objectives requires practice and experience. And how we will get the practice and experience? That we will get by studying the literature, by comparing different type of old or like already obtained data and measurement methods which already been placed in that specific study area or on the same type of the study areas. So articulating specific objectives, we need to know that how we can set a criteria for writing the good objectives. So there are two categories, good and bad. So we will only consider on the good objective like criteria. So good objectives should be specific, precise, measurable, result oriented, realistic, obtainable, meaningful, concise, and clear, and easily understandable. Hope you all understand all the topic. Further, our second lecture will be related to the next components of during how after the designing the objectives, what are the next steps to do. Thank you.